After weeks of geopolitical squabbling, a major moment in the war in Ukraine has arrived. Germany has announced that it will provide Leopard 2 tanks to Kyiv's troops. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced the move on Wednesday, bowing to intensifying international pressure led by the United States, Poland, and a bloc of other European nations, which called on Berlin to step up its military support and commit to sending their sought-after vehicles. The announcement was matched by the US. On Wednesday, President Joe Biden said that he was providing 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, reversing the administration's long-standing resistance to requests from Kyiv for the highly sophisticated but maintenance-heavy vehicles. And the influx of Western tanks to the conflict has the potential to change the shape of the war. The shipments are a breakthrough in the West's military support for Kyiv, signaling a bullish view around the world about Ukraine's ability to reclaim occupied territory. Crucially, they may allow Ukraine to take the fighting to Moscow's forces and recapture more occupied land, rather than focusing on primarily beating back Russian attacks. Here's what you need to know about the recent developments and how they affect the war. What has been announced? Scholz said in the German parliament on Wednesday that its government will send 14 Leopard tanks to Ukraine, wrapping up months of deliberation and several days of tense negotiations with NATO partners. This is the result of intensive consultations that took place with Germany's closest European and international partners. A government statement said, "The German army has 320 Leopard 2 tanks in its possession, but does not reveal how many would be battle-ready." A spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense previously told CNN, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff welcomed the news that Germany will send his country Leopard 2 tank and the combat tanks, and reiterated they needed a lot of them. The first tank step has been taken. Next up is the tank coalition. "We need a lot of Leopards," Andriy Yermak said on Telegram. When will Ukraine be able to use them? The goal is to quickly assemble 2 battalions with Leopard 2 tanks, the German government statement said. The training of the Ukrainian crews is to begin quickly in Germany. In addition to training, the package will also include logistics, ammunition, and maintenance of the systems. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said the Leopard tanks could be operational in Ukraine in about 3 months. The plan for incorporating Abrams tanks will likely be more complicated. Not only do they need to cross the Atlantic Ocean first, but their systems are considered more complex. The Abrams tank is a very complicated piece of equipment. It's expensive. It's hard to train on. It has a jet engine. Colin Kahl, the Pentagon's Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, told Reuters last week, "I just don't think we're there yet," Kahl said at the same time on giving the tanks to Ukraine, a sign of how quickly the US position has evolved during the past days of negotiations. The ability to get Ukrainians into Leopards quickly was always seen as an advantage of sending that type of tank over the more cumbersome Abrams. Abrams are also considerably heavier than most iterations of the Leopard, so you need to give Ukraine additional engineering and recovery equipment. Gustav Gressel, a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, told CNN. Why are Leopard 2 tanks needed? Wednesday's announcement means Ukraine will soon be in possession of a modern tank that would hugely boost their arsenal ahead of renewed ground fighting anticipated in the spring. Ukraine is bracing for a Russian offensive in the coming weeks, aimed at completing the capture of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, the primary goal set by President Vladimir Putin for what he euphemistically calls his special military operation. The Ukrainian military's most senior officer, Gen Valery Zolzonev, said in December that Ukraine expected a Russian offensive any time between the end of January and March. Previous military aid, like the American HIMARS rocket system, has been vital in helping Ukraine disrupt Russian advances and make a series of successful counteroffensives in recent months. Kyiv will hope that Western tanks will have a similar impact on the slow, grinding ground war in Ukraine's east. Tanks represent the most powerful direct offensive weapon provided to Ukraine so far. a heavily armed and armored system designed to meet the enemy head-on instead of firing from a distance. If used properly with the necessary training, they could allow Ukraine to take territory against Russian forces that have had time to dig defensive lines. The US has begun supplying refurbished Soviet-era T-72 tanks, but modern Western tanks are a generation ahead in terms of their ability to target enemy positions. Ukrainian officials say they need several hundred main battle tanks not only to defend their present positions, but also take the fight to the enemy in the coming months. Of course, we need a large number of Western tanks. They are much better than the Soviet models and can help us advance. Lieutenant General Serhiy Naiv told CNN. How many tanks will be sent? Germany said it will be sending 14 tanks to Ukraine as a first step and aims to get them into the hands of troops quickly. Crucially, Berlin's announcement will likely also encourage other European nations who own Leopards to re-export some of their vehicles. Typically, this would require Germany's approval, and some countries had shown hesitance in sending tanks unless a coalition of nations doing the same could be formed. I call on all new partners that have Leopard 2 tanks in service to join the coalition and provide as many of them as possible, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said. They are free now. Several armies use Leopards. In total, there are around 2,000 Leopard 2 vehicles across Europe at different levels of readiness. Leopards offer survivability unmatched by Russian tanks. The Leopard 2 was originally designed in the 1970s for the West Germany Army in response to Soviet threats during the Cold War. It carries a reputation as one of the best battle tanks in the world and boasts a number of features that put it on advantage over the Soviet-era tanks being used by the Russian forces. It combines maneuverability with a high degree of protection and powerful main gun. The tanks are designed and built to move quickly with a top speed of around 70 km per hour. They're fueled by a diesel engine, which is relatively accessible fuel to Ukraine, unlike the jet fuel that powers the M1 Abrams tanks the US has pledged. According to its German manufacturer, Wegmann, the Leopard 2s also feature modern thermal imaging, which allows them to be operated in the dark of night, plus magnified optics with a laser rangefinder to track distant targets. Perhaps one of the greater advantages of the Leopard 2 tanks, however, are the added protection for crew inside. Many images that have circulated of battle front lines are now long past. They show the burned shells of tanks, the turrets of which lie to the side, dismembered from the hull. Evidence of lethal jack-in-the-box explosions. In some Soviet-era tanks, such as the T-72s being used by the Russians, ammunition is stored inside the tank beneath the crew, which, when the outer shell is ruptured by enemy forces, can trigger a chain of detonations and explode in a blast so powerful that the turret is blown off the body of the tank. The Leopard 2s carry ammunition behind the crew, heavily partitioned and protected to avoid such devastation. Their ammunition is standardized NATO 120mm, which would grant Ukraine access to a larger pool of suppliers than its current tanks, which requires 120mm. It can survive in the firing zone and thus provide the fire support to infantry moving up with it. It can suppress the enemy's firing positions and give the chance to actually move troops forward. How has Russia responded? Russia reacted angrily on the initial reports that Germany and the US would send tanks to Ukraine in much the same way it responded to the UK's earlier decision to send tanks. Kremlin officials have also sought to cast the sending of tanks as an act of aggression against Russia, fueling their bogus narrative that their so-called military operation is required to defend Russian interests rather than to capture Ukraine. Russian ambassador to Germany Sergei Neshev said in a statement Wednesday that Berlin's decision was extremely dangerous and takes the conflict to a whole new level of confrontation. Concluding remarks: Germany's decision to provide Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine along with the US providing M1 Abrams tanks is a significant development in the conflict. The tanks will allow Ukraine to take the fighting to Moscow's forces and recapture more occupied land rather than primarily focusing on beating back Russian attacks. While Germany has committed to sending 14 tanks, the US is providing 31 M1 Abrams tanks, which will take longer to become operational due to their complexity. The announcement will likely encourage their European nations who own Leopards to re-export some of their vehicles, which would require Germany's approval. Overall, the influx of Western tanks has the potential to change the shape of the war, signaling a bullish view around the world about Ukraine's ability to reclaim occupied territory. If you enjoyed this video and would like to receive notifications for future updates, please consider subscribing to our channel and clicking the bell icon to stay updated.